So I think we are going to make a start, and there could be delegates coming in as we're talking, which is absolutely fine, because by looking at the numbers, we are still waiting for quite a few, but we do have a lot to get through. So we will make a start. So good morning, good evening, depending on which part of the world you are in, and welcome to this sold out webinar. We are absolutely ecstatic about how many people have signed up to hear us speak today. We're going to be talking about children's rights and participation in youth justice systems, and we're given an international perspective of the English and Welsh perspective and the Australian perspective. And Manchester Metropolitan University and the University of Sydney, we wanted to bring colleagues together to explore the experiences, mainly around upholding children's rights and any sort of participation frameworks and models that the English and Australian youth justice systems may already be using or may be developing. And I know just from my conversations with the contributors today that there are some similarities, but there are also many differences between the approaches. And I'd like to thank my colleagues Ghana and Sal for pulling this together with me. These things, as anyone who has organised them in the past, you will know that there's lots of things literally going on behind the scenes to make these things a successful event. And Sal in particular deserves special mention for everything that he has done in organising today's event. So we've got 5 short presentations from colleagues today. So I will be presenting first, and I've just realised I actually didn't introduce myself. So I'm Hannah Smithson, and I'm Professor of Criminology and Youth Justice at Man Met University. And my colleague Tom Lang, who I hope will be joining us soon, is the Head of Youth Justice Services in Manchester. And that's one of the biggest youth justice services in England. And Tom and I are going to do a little bit of a double act with our presentation. We'll be followed by Garner Clancy from the University of Sydney, who will be followed by Annika Ross from New South Wales Youth Justice, and Lisa Ewanson from the University of Sydney will close the presentations. I'll then be passing on to the wonderful Anne Longfield, who's chair of the Commission on Young Lives and the former Children's Commissioner for England, who is joining us as our discussion. Mute. There we go. Sorry, I was muted for a minute then. I'm not anymore. Sorry, I'll just repeat that. You'll notice that there is a recording icon. We're recording the presentations, but not the Q&A. So please don't worry about your questions being recorded. They won't be. So I'd now like to pass over to Anne, who will kick off proceedings and provide a short context of the current English environment. Thank you, Anne. Anne, you're on mute.
Sorry, are we showing the short video with your presentation? Brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you, Hannah, for getting us going. And I'm really pleased to be helping with the seminar this morning, really hoping to facilitate some of your points and questions, but also take us through the great speakers that we have this morning. And it's always, I think, a fantastic opportunity to look at how different countries, different environments, different organizations have taken some of these issues. I think everyone would be the first to say it's not perfect in either of the countries that we're going to be looking at here, but there's certainly movement, there's strategic gains, and there's a greater identification of some of the areas where further action is needed. And I've got to say, some great work with young people themselves. So I think expect a lot of commentary which is grounded in the real world as well. This isn't going to be a discussion which just is about the concept. I think it's very much as well about the reality of what is being achieved with young people. Just a couple of things I wanted to set out. I was Children's Commissioner for my 6-year stint until about 3 years ago, and it was as part of that, I spent a lot of time visiting young people in custody and talking to young people who were part of the youth justice system. I would always kind of ask them about their own lives, and the things they would always tell me would be so very consistent. So many had a regular education experience. Often they've been excluded. I don't need to tell anyone this, but just so we reminded, often they've been excluded from school or were out of school. Very often had special educational needs of some kind, often unmet. Very vulnerable home environments, very often poor mental health, and often a very poor experience of support and services around them. And all of those things combined meant that, of course, these are some of the most marginalized young people and the ones who have not been used to having either their views often sought or heard, and sense of agency is a really important factor of what we're going to be looking at today. Children's rights, of course, are universal. They don't pick and choose what the context is, but clearly in a custody environment, that's something that all of those that have responsibility around the young person will need to find a way to implement in sometimes with the modification around the environment, but nonetheless they're universal. And I think some of this as well comes down to that core consideration of what we want from the youth justice service. Now, in England and Wales, there's been a positive move towards child first approach that many of you will have found encouraging. I think that in itself is a positive platform, looking very much at diversion, at engagement, and around working with young people to provide that platform for a positive future. But of course, having a policy and ensuring that it's something that those that are in that situation in terms of lived experience day in, day out is a very different matter. So I'm really pleased to be able to be part of this discussion this morning. We are going to have QA in a while, but I go first to Hannah and Tom, I believe. Has Tom been able to? Yes, I can see Tom has now joined us. Hannah, he's just there. So over to you, Hannah and Tom.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. Thank you for setting the context so comprehensively there. I am going to pick up a little bit on some of the things that Anne said, particularly about Child First. But I would just want to provide you a little bit of context about some of the work that we do at Manchester Metropolitan University alongside our professional colleagues in the youth justice system. So since 2015, Tom and I have been working together through a formal partnership between the university and the 10 youth offending teams across the Greater Manchester region. For those of you who aren't familiar with Greater Manchester, it's one of the largest metropolitan areas in England, and it's in the northwest of England. So the partnership that we have is called the Greater Manchester Youth Justice University Partnership. We shorten that to GMYJUP because it doesn't really roll off the tongue that easily. So GMYJUP is the first of its kind in a youth justice context, and it predominantly focuses on strengthening justice-involved children's participation in decision-making processes and embedding meaningful participation in youth justice service, delivery and practice. So we call it a bi-directional transfer of knowledge between academia and youth justice practice. So the evolution of GMYJUP was, I guess, an organic process, like many of these things are. So for many years, the university had informal connections with the youth justice teams across the Greater Manchester region. And like so many partnerships, it took just a couple of meetings with invested individuals to recognise the mutual benefits of academics and practitioners working together in a formal, joined up way. So what we've managed to do over the past nearly 10 years now is embed a knowledge base and a research capability that provides more inclusive ways to work with children and young people in the youth justice system. So we provide the academic knowledge and the academic evidence base, whereas our youth justice professionals and practitioners, I suppose, prevent us as academics from the blue sky thinking. And we have to think very much about, okay, how will this impact practitioners? How will it impact children? So that working in partnership brings that wonderful basis of knowledge, and we learn as academics as much from those professionals as hopefully the professionals do from us. So as Anne said, in England and Wales, there's been a noticeable shift, I would say, over the last 5 years in how children in the youth justice system are viewed. So we had in 2016 what is referred to as the Taylor Review of the English and Welsh youth justice system. And that review, and I'm simplifying it because it was a very large review, called for a system in which young people are treated as children first and offenders second. So since then, this philosophy of a child first approach and its associated principles has gained traction in the English and Welsh youth justice system. And while I would suggest that the embedding of child first is clearly something to be welcomed, Tom and I use the adage, actions speak louder than words, to emphasise the point that there needs to be much more of a focus on how youth justice policymakers and practitioners translate child first into their practice. And in our experience, child first, child participation, children's voice and co-production are used interchangeably. And I would suggest that that is with little thought for what they mean for youth justice on the ground. And this is problematic because we know that tokenistic approaches to participation have the potential to be extremely damaging for children. And it's with this in mind that what I'm going to talk about next, our development of a new participatory framework, that we have tried to overcome some of those challenges around what participation actually means in practice. So we developed between 2015 and 2017 a new framework of youth justice practice, which we call participatory youth practice. And through our GMY partnership, we developed this with each of the teams in the Greater Manchester region. But what makes it really unique is that it was co-created with justice involved children. So we worked with the children for around 2 years. It was very much led by what they wanted to do in terms of methodology. It was very much led in terms of their experiences of youth justice and what they wanted to tell us. And it was very much developed based on how they want practitioners and professionals to work with them. So what I'm going to show you is actually a film, because it's much more interesting than me explaining what the participatory youth practice framework is. So at the end of the project, we asked children how they would want to disseminate this and explain to professionals what PYP is. So they made a film. And this explains exactly what PYP is and the 8 principles that are incorporated into the framework. Sal, could you please provide the film link? Thank you. So this is the film that they made to explain PYP.
I know I've done things that were wrong, but listen to my story, listen to my song. I've been dodging and weaving, left a couple man bleeding, but people don't understand how I'm feeling. My life's changing, I'm trying to make things happen. I got something to say when I'm rapping. I want them all to listen to my views, use consideration when considering what to do. I don't think that you understand. I'm from the streets where the dealers run the land. I've witnessed shit that I never want to see again. I sit and think about my life every now and then, especially now that my boys are all up in pen. I hope I get an opportunity, I just don't know when. So I'm changing my life. Hood's fucked up, I'll let you roll the dice. I've been out here for ages, feet aching, still money motivated, looking for a better life. I remember them times I was rolling with a big knife. Really wishing life wasn't so tough, got me feeling like I don't give a fuck. Cause they all wanna have me in cuffs, getting out of this cycle is rough. Got me on possession, intense and supply. Lord, please tell me why they try and mess up my life and keep me away from temptation and avoid another assassination. 2017, I'm still trapped in the system. 2 years probation really got me thinking, is it worth it? I was like an old bike that needed service. Now I got my service, you know that I'm working. You know that I'm working. Yeah, I'm 16, but the mind of an older. My life got colder. The streets got me feeling like a soldier. The life that I'm living's not the life that I choose. The life that I'm living got me feeling like a cynic. Out on the road trying to earn a fucking killing. And all this work got me feeling like a man on a mission.
It's okay to stop it there, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to pass over to Tom now, and Tom is the head of services, of youth justice services in Manchester, and Tom provides the insight into how the participatory youth practice framework is actually used by his team. So Tom, over to you.
Good morning or good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Tom Lang, the head of service at Manchester Youth Justice, and worked with vulnerable children for 20 years, and done every job in the system before really running the service. Now, when you've participatory practice works, it's really, firstly, it's that acknowledgement that in youth justice, especially in Manchester, we're working with a very small cohort of children, but that cohort of children are society's most underserved and most vulnerable children in society. So the framework around working with them, it's not what we found in Manchester was when we released this framework designed by children for practitioners working in the system, is they kind of wanted a one-stop shop. They wanted a program to work through and sort.
I think you're on mute there, Tom. I think it's clicked onto mute.
How did that happen?
Apologies.
Sorry, so yeah, society's most underserved and most vulnerable children. And what this framework was, it was a shift in how we work with children. So we've moved away from that probation adult model of working with children around their offending behaviour to really having a more holistic approach to looking at the child's life and their strengths, really, and taking a strength-based approach to supporting children to get better outcomes. And when we break it down, like the 8 key principles, when we truly understand it, it's how we assess, it's how we plan, it's how we review, and it's how we end our interventions. It's not, like I said, it's not a set of principles you work through one by one, and therefore you've solved the problems in the child's life. Because wherefore child first is a philosophy. PYP is a framework what puts trusted relationships and co-production at the centre of what we do. And we give children a voice, and we understand the child's lived experiences and how their lived experiences has resulted in the presenting behaviours becoming before the courts. So, let them participate. In 2017, the children were saying the same messages, the same words you've just seen in that video. But the sad thing is the system wasn't ready to listen and hear what they were saying. And they use different languages to things like exploitation and the lack of opportunities. Whereas one child said to me, he says, you say exploitation and grooming, I say relationships and opportunities. And you see in that video there around, around what they're saying is what they're saying about, I live in a place where the dealers run the land, and this was the lack of opportunity our children face. Now, 45% of children in Manchester are living in relative poverty, and the criminal justice system is disproportionately represented by Black and mixed heritage boys. First thing is we need to realise this, and in order to understand their lived experiences, to let them participate. Now, letting them participate is a key thing, because as you all know, working in the system, any system imposed upon a child, if it lacks legitimacy in the eyes and the mind of that child, whether that be youth justice, whether that be child protection, whether that be becoming looked after or going to a specialist educational placement, if it lacks legitimacy, if the child doesn't understand why it's being imposed, then the meaning of that intervention is lost. And it's the same with youth justice. So that key bit, first and foremost, is having trusted relationships. And it was me giving the staff the permission to go out and get to know children, to build trust, to persevere, be persistent, have tenacity when trying to engage and build trust. That takes time and effort. That's not a few worksheets. That's an approach. It's a way of being, and it's got to be led from the service's key principles. And again, always unpicking why. The children told us to don't just describe our behaviour or our lived experiences. Unpick why we're seeing the presenting behaviours before us. And that then led us into the journey around becoming a trauma responsive and trauma informed service. Understanding how adverse childhood experiences really impacts on a child's brain development, how the impacts on their amygdala and the fight, flight, freeze responses, and how it's often those responses to perceived threats is why children end up in the system. Acknowledging limited life chances. They told us that in 2017. It was only 2-3 years ago that we really got to grips with actually systemic racism, lack of opportunities, the adultification of Black and mixed heritage boys in the court system, in the education system, and in the youth justice system. He said avoid threats and sanctions. Now, what that means to my staff went crazy when they heard that. We can't avoid threats and sanctions, but what that means is you can't threaten a traumatized child to behave in the way society thinks is acceptable and correct. Threats don't work. Threats aren't the answer. The threat of going to court, the threat of going to prison isn't going to, you can't scare children straight. You know, that old sort of Victorian approach to rehabilitation. You avoid threats and sanctions by building positive relationships and teaching children how to problem solve, creating better options for children, so that not only can we develop ambition, but most importantly in the child's mind is that ambition, that drive, that goal has got to be achievable in their mind, and that's where developing steps is so important. And remembering it's their choice. So many children I've worked with in the past who've had a negative outcome in their life have thanked me or thanked my staff for trying, for the commitment, for that tenacity, for trying to break the cycles of harm they're experiencing. So just to cut it in there, it's like PYP, it's an approach, it's a framework, it's a way of working, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of approaching the work we do in Manchester. And the impact it's having in Manchester is better outcomes. We've got better resources for helping exploited children, vulnerable children who are trapped in cycles of harm, in order to get them out. But most importantly, it's truly understanding the children we're working with and enabling us to have a proper, positive, strength-based, aspirational approach to helping children achieve better outcomes and shifting away from that real preoccupation with risk. So, yeah, Hannah, back over to you.
Yeah, I'm literally just going to, thanks, Tom. I think having Tom and I, when we do these joint presentations, for me to give kind of the academic side of things, but then for Tom to really explain how the framework is used in practice is what brings this alive. So just very quickly, we relaunched participatory youth practice this year, and that was 5 years after its initial creation. And what that allowed us to do was to take into account the winds of change in relation to children's participation. So we've stress tested the framework over a number of years now with professionals and children. We've worked closely with our youth justice colleagues to assess how the framework works in practice, the challenges that professionals may encounter with it, and in what way the framework may need to be adapted for use. We use PYP in all our academic research projects. It underpins our research now. And what we did in the relaunch was to draw on up-to-date research and theory, mainly in the area of trauma-informed research, to ensure that that was integrated into the framework and reflect what we now know about trauma-informed practice. And although the participatory youth practice framework was designed in the youth justice system for the youth justice system, it can be used in most settings when working with seldom heard children and young people. And it really is, as Tom says, a tool designed to support professionals in enhancing participatory practice. Sal, could I just have the very last slide of the first slide deck that I sent, because I just want to show the audience the links to the resources that we've produced, because we now are taking PYP around the country and maybe hopefully beyond on an international level. Sorry, Sal, not that slide deck. It's the one that's got some links to the PYP booklets. So we're training professionals now in how to use the PYP framework. And I just wanted to show you And if we can't find it, it's fine. I can put it in the chat function. We've developed a training guide and also a PYP booklet that's got examples in there and, you know, things that you can use in your own practice. We can always show it. We can always show it later, Sal. It's fine. Oh, no, this is it. Yeah. Would you be able to open up the link at all, Sal? And these are some of the publications around PYP, and you can see that Tom and I have been publishing together as well. Yes, so this is the participatory framework. Well, it's the engagement framework, and this is in the public domain. You can take this, you can use this, and we can put the link in the chat function. It goes through each of the principles. It talks a little bit about how we developed it, but it also gives examples of how you can use it in your own practice. And I think we will have to leave it there because we've probably gone well over time. So thank you, Tom, for your wonderful explanation of how you use PYP in practice. I'm now going to pass over to Garner. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Before I say a few words, can I acknowledge country? We recognise and pay respects to the elders and communities past, present and emerging of the lands that the University of Sydney's campuses stand on. For thousands of years, they've shared and exchanged knowledge across innumerable generations for the benefit of all. It's something we do at the beginning of meetings to acknowledge custodianship of country. And it's important for us, particularly in the youth justice space, to recognise Indigenous young people are significantly overrepresented in all youth justice systems in Australia, to the extent that on any one day, maybe 55 to 60% of young people in custody in New South Wales are Indigenous, and yet they make up less than 5% of the youth population. So an ongoing challenge for all of our youth justice systems. I just want to say a small number of words and really to begin by saying thank you to Hannah for organising this. I hope this is the first of a number of events that we get to run, because the idea of sharing and discussing practice across jurisdictions is appealing, because some of what we've already heard resonates very much with what's happening here in Australia and certainly in New South Wales. And there are differences, and so we can learn from some of those things. By way of context, youth justice systems in Australia are the responsibility of the 8 states and territories. So some things are similar and some things are different across the country. Tonight, our focus is on New South Wales, the jurisdiction we sit in. And just to give it a little context, it's a very large landmass. Our country and our jurisdiction is a big geography. And for those who have not been to Australia and not worked in Australia, it is a really significant and important variable. Providing services across a large landmass stretch, limited resources, the access to services are very uneven. Those young people who find themselves in regional and remote communities are far less likely to get access to all of the kind of support and prevention services that young people find they can access in the large metropolises of our capital cities or a place like Sydney. And so we end up with concerns around justice by geography in jurisdictions in Australia where young people in those urban areas do better than those young people in regional areas. And often Aboriginal young people are coming from remote and regional communities who are poorly serviced by a variety of service systems. Unlike Hannah, we're a bit slow to the party. You've been doing this work for some years, but in July 2021, the University of Sydney and Youth Justice New South Wales entered into a memorandum of understanding. In many respects, like Hannah said, it builds on informal work that has happened for some time. We're at the beginning of our formal relationship, and we've done many, many exciting things in the 2 and a bit years since the signing of the MOU. We've had hundreds of students pass through youth justice related placements and projects, some of which are incredibly exciting to me. Digital innovation students creating virtual reality content for youth justice to use. We've had a group of occupational therapy students simplify the classification system in custody to turn complex words into simple images to explain to young people what it means to be classified at particular levels. We've had law students volunteer for law reform project units and looked at a variety of legislative context, bail, terrorism laws, looking at sentencing, looking at harmonising all of the youth justice legislation to think about what a single instrument would look like. We've done a bunch of other things that support kind of workforce development and professional development across the two organisations. And we're about to release a book on youth crime, youth justice and children's courts in New South Wales, which I'm especially proud of as a co-editor because it gives voice to the practice. Often practitioners, I think, increasingly are locked out of contributing to academic publications and scholarship. And so having practitioners contribute through this book is incredibly pleasing. I'm very passionate about these developments because they're building a mutual understanding, providing platforms for Youth Justice New South Wales staff to speak about and document their work and make possible engagement across non-traditional disciplines such as digital innovation, cyber psychology, occupational therapy, speech therapy, exercise science, and many more. I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Anika, who's doing fabulous work around participation, and then to hear from Lisa, who's done some research that is really on point about young people's experience of youth custody. Thanks, Anika.
Thank you, and hello everybody. Thank you for the acknowledgement as well, Ghana. I'm coming to you all from Barramadigal Lands in Western Sydney, and the acknowledgement is particularly important not only because we're recognising the strengths of our First Nations people, who are all too often seen through a deficit-focused lens in this system, but I also want to acknowledge that it's really important for both our jurisdictions here and in the UK, the significance of cultural safety and cultural awareness in the work we do in the youth justice space. And I guess really acknowledge the past impacts of government decisions and policies that has actually impacted Aboriginal young people in the youth justice system. So really important, a lovely way for us to start. So thank you for that. So I actually fell into this work by chance, and I left school to do archaeology, ended up in a sociology degree, and was naturally really drawn to working with young people through that sort of early space. But I actually found my place, I feel, when I moved to London, and I was sent on a random job interview. I ended up in the suburbs down in South London. I didn't know what the job interview was, but I walked through these doors of this beautiful old house that had been converted, and it was a youth offending team. And I felt instantly at home, which was a really big deal because I was young and I've left Sydney for this big new world. And I guess it really resonated with how I really enjoyed working with young people to help them make change. And I still feel really passionate about how privileged it is, right, for a young person to want to sit down and talk to you. And I think that is still something that really, really I find so important in our work. And here I am 17 years later. I've done various roles in youth justice, and I've just stepped away from managing one of our community offices and stepped into a non-frontline role for the first time. Apart from my team being a key mechanism in youth justice to do all the ad hoc response work that goes up to ministers and cross-government, we also take care of a really cool portfolio of work for youth justice, which is disability and domestic and family violence. We also do work in the LGBTQIA+ space for young people. And most importantly, we take care of all the child safe work and the policy work in that space. And I've actually started describing the team that I work with as kind of that unit where, we've all got those hall closets in our house where you kind of shove stuff that doesn't have a home. And that's pretty much kind of what my team does. And we really have diverse and varied policy work. And they're a super driven bunch of people, which is fantastic. So as Ghana mentioned, New South Wales is a pretty big patch of grass, and we have 6 detention centres across New South Wales, and we run 34 community offices here as well. And when I checked last night, we had 787 young people that we were providing community supervision to across the state, and we had around 212 young people in custody. And significantly, 55% of those are Aboriginal, as Ghana mentioned. And I want you all to hold on to that appalling reality, right? Because young people then are very much front and centre, as they need to be, in the work we're doing here in New South Wales around child safety, child rights and participation. So we have formal mechanisms that oversight youth justice as part of legislation. But what I really want to sort of take you to is that In the space we're working in the justice and child protection space here in New South Wales, child rights and participation is very much born out of the vehicle of child safety. So that's where I'm going to start, at the tough end of the story. So in New South Wales, the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Sexual Abuse released its final massive report at the end of December 2017. There was 409 recommendations. The government endorsed most of them, and 10 of those recs landed in the patch of Youth Justice New South Wales. Side to that, a really important piece of work that came out of that was the Child Safe Scheme and the 10 child safe standards and principles that organisations are now legislated to adhere to and to demonstrate that we work towards. And as you know, the really high profile, high risk organisations like the justice system is very much front and centre in working towards demonstrating how we meet those. So around that time, our initial response was that we formed an agency-wide child safe working group where we worked together with all our business units in the agency to develop a child safe framework. And this provided the clear goals and outcomes for how we needed to work towards keeping young people safe and how we increased young people's participation and service feedback opportunities. And two really key components of that were around us recognising that we need to seek, acknowledge and respect young people's voices, and that children and young people trust us. And in 2020, we worked in partnership with the Department of Customer Service here in New South Wales. They're kind of like the gateway to all government services for the public. And they interviewed a whole raft of young people and their families who were involved in community supervision. And they sought to understand how Youth Justice New South Wales could be the most youth-centred service and enable and support and empower connections between young people, their families, and us as the service system. So with this report and a bunch of other consultations, we had a really clear blueprint on how we can work towards being more child safe and rights focused in the work that we were doing. And the Child Safety and Empowerment Program of Work was launched in New South Wales, which had these really two clear directions, which was safety and was around participation. So some of the work that's been happening so far in New South Wales is that we've created tools for managers who run community offices and custodial facilities to help them meet the child safe framework in youth justice, to really localise what that looks like for their patch, for their staff, for the young people that they're working with, to really improve safety in that localised way, ensure that there's feedback mechanisms in place and inclusivity in the physical space that young people are walking into in their office. We've developed the Recognising Young People's Contribution to Youth Justice policy, which provides guidance on how we need to recognise and acknowledge young people's contributions when they're involved in consultation, co-design and project governance. We've built in child safe goals into staff performance development plans. We've included child safe statements in our operational policies and procedures. And, you know, again, handing the power to the local teams to do the work in their spaces, make sure that child safe is always on team meeting agendas, for example. We worked with a bunch of young people to come up with a charter of rights for young people in our detention centres, which really promotes the rights to inclusion, health and wellbeing, education and training, access to support and information, and safety and protection. And on the back of young people telling us that they didn't trust our complaints mechanisms, we've done a lot of work to make it more child-centred and more culturally responsive. And we have a much better system of young people being able to make complaints in detention centres and have cultural support if they're a young person who identifies as Aboriginal, to support them in that process as well. And again, as I mentioned, it's about handing that power and responsibility to local teams. And for example, one team has got this amazing tree decal in their office waiting room with all the branches coming out, where young people can put their feedback on the branches when they're visiting the office. So they can stick a post-it note up. And I think this process has been really transactional for staff, because it's around staff feeling comfortable to ask for feedback, that it's really okay to sit down with a young person and have that conversation. And by and large, the feedback's often really great. You know, it's really about, I had a great session with you, or thanks for helping me sort out my, you know, my pay, or whatever it is. And I think it's about staff starting to feel comfortable and normalized in the process of asking for feedback. So I'm going to end, I guess, on the warm and fuzzy part of this story. We are today moving more from that safety platform to sort of enhancing this into the participatory framework. And it's been really exciting hearing what the work that's happening, because we will, as we do best, steal a lot of those ideas. So thank you for going first, Manchester. Here in New South Wales, we have started our journey by conducting staff consultations to unpack what they think participation looks like with young people in the service, and how they actually think young people are engaged already in their offices. We've launched our first inaugural Young People's Safety and Empowerment Questionnaire, which is a measure of progress against our Child Safe framework. And it's an online survey for young people in custody and community to tell us how safe they feel in youth justice. We're about to do our second iteration of that. We've also begun doing service improvement interviews with young people, where we give them the opportunity to tell their story on their terms and allow them to share where they're at in their supervision experience with us. And then that data service experience, that data around their service experience informs policy development and operational decisions. We're also in the prototype phase of what we're calling the Voice Box, which is a data bank of what young people have told us over the last 5 years through research, interviews, consultation, surveys, where their information has gone out to different players, different researchers, and we've pulled it all together and thematically pulled it into groups. It's been de-identified, and staff in the policy space can search those themes and pull up what young people have already said about that. So it's around recognising their contributions, not letting their feedback go into the black hole that sometimes happens. And I guess providing the integrity that we are actually listening to what you tell us, that you so graciously share with us. We also have detainee representative committees in all our detention centres, which feed into development around rules and expectations and programs that are happening in our detention centres. And I guess finally, this next phase that we're moving into here in Youth Justice New South Wales is exploring the formal model of participation around how can young people be involved in advising us from an agency level. I guess a youth advisory committee, for better want of word there. And it's around also thinking, how do we include the lived experience of past clients in that space as well? What can they share with us, and what learnings can we take away from them? So look, as Anne mentioned, we're not perfect. We are definitely in a growth mindset, but we're really hopeful that we will continue to make the language around children's voices our business as usual. And I just wanted to finish off by leaving you with the philosophy that we have here around how we work, which is that we really believe young people can change. We really believe that young people can change and we can keep communities safe, and that every interaction is an opportunity with a young person. So thank you for inviting us to come along. And I guess that's over to you, Lisa.
Great. Thank you so much, Annika, and hi, everyone. So my name's Lisa Ewanson, and this is a little bit of a change of tack. I'm talking about my doctoral research, which I completed last year, and that project involved undertaking narrative inquiry, which is a storytelling qualitative research project with young people in New South Wales who'd been recently released from youth justice detention. So it was a participatory project employing a child rights-based approach, covering some of the things that have been mentioned here today. And so the goal was to learn from these young people who are outside of detention about what was good and what was bad from their perspectives about detention, to provisionally reimagine justice detention in New South Wales. It was a smaller project than anticipated because it occurred right in the middle of COVID-19. So I ended up engaging with 12 really articulate, amazing young people who had been recently released, 6 First Nations young people, 3 Pacific Islander young people and 3 Anglo-Saxon young people. And pseudonyms are used throughout the thesis and any other documentation related. And 7 of these young people were women and 5 were men. So that's quite unusual for a youth justice research project. I tried to employ a research process of decolonisation. The Ethics Committee of the New South Wales Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council oversaw the research project for the reason that Annika and Ghana have touched on before, that between 55 to 60% of the young people in youth justice detention in New South Wales are First Nations young people, when population parity, it's 5%, 6%. So those numbers need to decrease dramatically, but I'll talk about that later. My interest is in qualitative research because I do believe that you can pull out richer, deeper understandings from young people, and I wanted these young people to enjoy the process with me, and I think they did. And I also think utilising stories, learning from these stories and drawing from these stories is quite a powerful way of trying to generate social change. But I want to firstly emphasise that this thesis and my research does not, of course, promote imprisonment, quite the contrary. But so the principles of further decarceration, New South Wales has reduced their youth justice detention population by 40% over the last 6 or so years. So that is significant. There's a fair way to go, including through raising the age of minimum criminal responsibility, ensuring those with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder aren't detained, of course, ensuring only those convicted of the most serious offences are detained, that remands minimally used, that's an area. And then it's the major area is ending the overrepresentation of First Nations young people in detention. So that they need to achieve population parity of about 5%. The numbers need to drop of First Nations young people in youth justice detention in New South Wales by about 90%, which is further than the current targets. And then, as I spoke before about trying to decolonise my research process of shifting the power to First Nations communities so they had oversight and control of the research project, it's acknowledging that decolonisation needs to happen within the criminal justice itself, but also within institutions and society more broadly. It's not just at the end stage. And for those tuning in from overseas, we had a referendum last weekend to try and instill an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament in the Constitution, and that failed significantly and dramatically. And there's a long way to go before reconciliation is achieved in this country. Okay, and it's also, and part of that, the referendum process, it just really demonstrates there's a long way to go in our society in terms of people understanding the historical and ongoing structural factors which propel Indigenous young people into detention. So in summary, I'll talk about the findings of the thesis. I won't draw on quotes here in this context because it's a bit tricky too, but some of them will appear in the book that Ghana mentioned before. So that will be interesting for those interested. But put simply, I asked these young people when they were released in an area where they were comfortable, can you please let's talk about what was good and bad in youth justice detention. And the young people ran the story. And I think there was some gatekeeping probably, the research project was done in conjunction with the Department of Communities and Justice, with Youth Justice. So perhaps I was funneled more, young people who were more, it's hard to know, but these young people really, spoke between 40 minutes and an hour and revealed a lot. What they revealed, it was really kind of a huge, obviously, learning experience for me. But I mean, and I have worked in closed detention environments for over 15 years, but the narratives about their time in detention revealed actually more, to some extent, about their lives prior to detention and about the significant failings of our society in all sorts of domains. So they also completely challenged the stereotype of youth out of control. They weren't youth out of control. They were articulate and thoughtful and wanted to engage. And I think they seemed quite pleased that they had the opportunity to engage and talk about their time in detention, in the hope that in some little way it may contribute to a greater system or a better system in the long run. The 4 key themes that the young people raised in this research was, and it touches upon some of your Manchester material actually, which is interesting, but the centrality of relationality for these young people. And the young people really deeply described the importance and the success they had in finding strong connections with their peers while in detention. Importance of cultural strength and safety, the Indigenous young people. There was a huge appreciation of the education services being provided in youth justice detention, and there were some concerns with bodily health and safety. Yeah, so it was described in an overall as a contradictory experience, as you would expect. It was an experience where you are deprived of your liberty, but it was also perceived by most of them as a period of respite and of calm from the chaos of their lives, unfortunately, before and through absolutely no fault of their own. So you couldn't get a more stark or striking indictment on our society. Okay, so in terms of relationality, it was just fun. It was fundamentally clear, and I did interview 7 young women, but the strength that these young people got from many of them, spoke about in a constructive fashion of those relationships, providing them strength and support once they were released. There was acknowledgement and recognition from the First Nations young people and the Pacifica young people that they enjoyed what was provided in terms of cultural connection and elders visiting and activities such as through NAIDOC Week. And there was some, seeking more would be good, but there were also young people who hadn't been particularly engaged with their connections before, and that's because of all of the problems we have in our society earlier. So they were appreciating about learning about some of their cultural systems in detention, which is also another stark and striking indictment on our society. There was also, and I think it's also important that for the First Nations young people, that there was some from some of the older young men that who were only 18 or 19, but for the risk of going to juvie being perceived as a rite of passage, and that obviously has to end with the decarceration, and the numbers need to go down dramatically of Indigenous young people in detention. One thing that was particularly striking was the overwhelmingly positive commentary about the educational opportunities in youth justice detention, and I think that flips both ways. I think youth justice detention, youth justice services were doing a good job with regards to provision of tailored educational services targeted to the young people in detention, but it also reflected that most of the young people were not engaged in schooling or anything before they. So it demonstrated that the mainstream
Lisa, we are losing you at points. It's breaking up. But please do carry on. It does come back, but I just wanted to let you know that we are losing you.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Sorry, the kids might be on the internet downstairs. I'm not sure. And I'm almost there. I'm almost there. Yes, but I found that, and many of the young people spoke of, feeling you know, it increased their ambition and their aspiration to retain engagement with the education system on the outside. So Youth Justice New South Wales had done a good job there of linking these young people back in. And then, you know, there were also issues, challenging circumstances, including descriptions of the overuse of confinement, strip searches, and the use of force. And it's also worth noting that most of the young people I had engaged with had been detained during the pandemic, so they'd experienced a really difficult experience anyway during a particularly difficult time, where the use of quarantining for 14 days on arrival and other such processes to try and reduce the spread of the virus occurred. So they'd been in detention in an extra difficult environment. And then at the conclusion of the chapter in Garner's book, and then I build upon these narratives that these young people had described to me, which were particularly powerful. And if you're interested, have a look at some of the quotes. But to kind of provide a very provisional sketching of a relational rights-based detention environment, and just changing the ethos of the staffing to some extent. So that's a summary of the research project. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions or talk to people another time about it in more detail. Thank you. Back to Anne.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I'm just going to jump. No, it's fine. I'm just going to jump in there because I owe you an apology, Lisa. I actually at the beginning introduced you as from the University of Sydney, and that is incorrect. You are at UNSW. And if we were to do that in Manchester, and I was to be introduced as from the University of Manchester rather than Manchester Met, it's the worst sin that you can commit. So apologies there.
That's fine. Yeah.
So that rounds up our speaker contributions, and Anne is now going to start the questions and the discussions, and we can see that in the Q&A there are already quite a few questions, and hopefully we have got enough time to get through all of those. So Anne, I'll pass it over to you, but I am here if you need me to jump in.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I mean, that was just such a fantastic set of presentations from my point of view. And what just shone through was the purpose and the intent behind it. I really was struck by so many of you talking about giving permission, not just to those staff working with young people, but to the whole system to be able to look differently with that. And then that really important recognition of the context of young people's lives. And I think that there's some questions in the Q&A about that, the strength-based approach, relational, but that trust and legitimacy as well. And this isn't, of course, going to be a straight tick box exercise, as you've made very clear. This is about every intersection with the system and with individuals looking at things differently and having that ambition, but also having that real sense that it can be achieved. Just to sum up from your perspectives, but thank you so much for organising this.
Thank you, Anne. What a great discussion. I think we could have gone on with those questions for most of the day. And apologies if we didn't get round to yours. What I will say is that if you do want to continue this discussion, or you have specific questions for anyone on the panel, my understanding is that we will be happy to be kind of emailed individually if there is something that you would like to know more about. So please do that. And I think I was sat here, and I get very excited about a lot of things, and I was sat here. It's strange working in the world of youth justice to use the word excited when you're talking about systems and experiences that are actually really quite awful for children. But what really struck me is how needed these conversations are. We can become very insular in our thinking, academics, professionals and governments. And I am very, very keen and very, very committed to learning from others. And there was so much that was said today where I was thinking, we need to know more about this. I mean, our Australian colleagues kind of were very modest at the beginning of this event by saying that you're further behind than we are in terms of participation and children's rights. I'm not sure, having listened to what you've said, that that is actually the case. And I, for one, would love to learn more about some of the things that you are doing in New South Wales. So thank you to all the presenters today. I hope that people on the other side of the screen listening today, that it also got you thinking about what it is that we do, how we can learn from each other. And thank you so much for your attendance today. And I hope that this is the first of many collaborative events such as this that we can do in the future. Ghana, do you just want to come in quickly there?
Yes, and to say thank you so much, Hannah, for kicking this off. It was your idea and a great idea. Thanks to Sal, who's behind the scenes doing kind of amazing things. It was an absolute treat to have met Anne, Tom, and to kind of hear in preparation for this about some of the great things that you're doing, the great fights that you're having in the name of youth justice and children's rights. We do look forward to receiving any emails. I've got a public email address. If you're trying to find Lisa and Anika and you have problems, write to me and I'll forward them on. We hopefully will have further discussions and we find the midpoint between the two countries and we'll come together and chat further about some of these issues. A real treat. Thank you so much, Hannah, and thanks for being the discussant, Anne.
Thank you. And I think that's the end of the event. So whether your evening is coming to an end or whether your day is just starting, have a good one, whatever it is that you are doing, and hopefully see some of you at future events. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.